lineup, the theme is human impacts. So that is the impacts that we have on plant health, but also the impacts that plant health has on us. We've got a great list of speakers for you. That we do have 4. I've tried to squeeze in 4, so there might not be too much time for question and answers. But hopefully, with no further messing about, if I could invite Rob to join us, I will stop sharing my screen. And yeah, welcome, Rob. Thank you. Rob is the Biosecurity Officer in South West. Great to have you with us. And yeah, the floor's all yours, Rob.
Great, thank you. Hi there, everyone. Okay, I'm just going to bring my presentation up now. Okay, so if someone could just let me know that you can see that okay?
Yeah, that's great, Rob.
Great, thanks. Well, hello everyone. My name's Rob from the Plant Health Forestry team in the Forestry Commission. I've worked with the FC for around 7 years now, initially joining as a tree health assistant, helping with the management of the Phytophthora ramorum programme. That's of course affected larch rhododendron and sweet chestnut trees. As forestry professionals or landowners, you will be aware of biosecurity and the important role it plays in the work we carry out to protect, improve and expand on England's woodlands. It's all our responsibility to protect our forests. If not us, then who? So good biosecurity aims to prevent the spread and introduction of pests and diseases by interrupting the pathways with which they move around. Tree pests and diseases are spread through the movement of infected material like leaf litter, soil, timber and live plants. They can be spread naturally or through human activity. This includes the movement of contaminated boots and kit, as well as global trade in live plants and timber. Natural pathways are difficult to manage, but we do have control over human-assisted pathways. So what work does the team undertake? So we support healthy trees, woods and forests now and in the future. We work together to prevent entry, provide early detection and minimise impacts of harmful tree pests and diseases, and to ensure traceability of forestry planting materials. So our team members can be found on the ground in forests, at docks and import-export sites, and also in the air in helicopters surveying forests. So what work does biosecurity actually entail? First of all, our team work at the border. Work by my plant health colleagues is ongoing during the COVID outbreak. They use border controls to prevent the entry of pests and diseases. Border controls ensure protection against quarantine organisms that are not established in England or the EU. They also promote certification schemes which ensure high quality planting material, which is free from specific pests and diseases, is available to growers. So one such border control is the ISPM 15 mark. It's an international phytosanitary measure that addresses the need to treat wood materials used to ship products between countries. Its main purpose is to prevent the international transport and spread of diseases and insects that could negatively affect plants or ecosystems. And this affects all wood packaging material, requiring that they be debarked and then heat treated or fumigated with methyl bromide and stamped or branded with a mark of compliance. And imported products are a direct route into the country for pests, so it's important to highlight risks to importers. And that's particularly where industrial or business parks are situated next to forests or woods in rural settings, as you could potentially be giving some exotic pests a free ride to the nearest forest. So knowledge and use of ISPM measures is becoming more and more essential. And you can see the stamp there on the bottom right-hand corner of the page. So just while we're on that, it's now a legal requirement for all wood packaging material moving in both directions between the UK and the EU to be compliant with the treatment mark as specified in the standard. And also, following the COVID-19 outbreak, manufacturers of wood packaging material are designated essential business by EU governments. This is because they are the preferred method of transporting goods, including food, drink and pharmaceuticals. So following biosecurity procedures to keep wood packaging materials free of pests and diseases is essential for the supply of goods into the country. So next we can take a look at the work undertaken inland by the tree health officers. We undertake an extensive surveillance programme, both by helicopter and on the ground, checking forests for signs of pests and diseases. This is really our chance to make early detections and reduce the damage they cause. So in the case of pests like Asian longhorn beetle, we can eradicate the threat through treatment if it's detected early enough. In other cases, we can only minimise the damage through outbreak management. So tree health officers will go up in the helicopter, which we rent, and they can fly over the known larch forests we have, taking photographs. They search through the photos looking for any trees that look suspicious to them, such as crown dieback or dead branches. And then they mark that tree for a visit by the ground team. So the pictures here show actions taken through outbreak management programs, and you can see the impact pests and diseases have on forests and the environment, and you can perhaps imagine the costs involved to landowners, industry and the economy. Treatment works we undertake minimise the damage and prevent further spread. So it's an essential part of the biosecurity continuum, but it is something we need to see less and less of. So really we need everyone to take on their biosecurity responsibilities to prevent further outbreaks. At the end of 2019, we had reached just over 4,300 hectares of larch that needed felling treatment, and this work still continues. So why do we undertake this work? We are seeing an increase in the number of pests and diseases becoming established here in the UK. This is due to a number of factors, but the main ones are climate changes and globalisation. So really an increase in trade and travel. There are several other contributing factors, including poor planning, such as poor species selection, planting establishment and management. There have also been significant advances in science and technology, which has led to better understanding of certain pests and diseases as well. So now we are better able to identify new threats as they appear. So this guide gives a rough guide to the timescale of pest and disease identification in the country. So you can see starting from Dutch elm disease in the 1970s. So 32 years on from that, we had 5 cases, but we've now had 20 cases in the last 16 years. We also have an increased demand in a wide range of plants and trees. We also have increased demand for instant impact trees, which is an increased risk. International trade of live plants is estimated to be responsible for 70% of tree pests entering the US, as an example. And we also have this increased capacity for shipping containers arriving annually in the UK. So some of the pests and disease that we are up against, they come in the form of fungus, bacteria, oomocytes and insects. So some of the main pests and diseases to highlight today are, of course, ash dieback from the fungus group, Phytophthora ramorum from the oomocyte group, oak processionary moth from the insect group. We also have featured here Xylella fastidiosa, which we don't have in the UK at present, but due to its high risk, it keeps us busy with yearly surveys, so we can raise the alarm and deal with it promptly if it's identified. So as an example, I've conducted yearly surveys of wild cherry tree, which we use as sentinels for the potential arrival of Xylella. So if you have any wild cherry tree close to you, you can familiarise yourselves with the symptoms and report any findings via our tree alert webpage, which I'll mention later on. We have had cases of Asian longhorn beetle, but these have since been eradicated. So as forestry professionals and landowners, we need to understand the common pathways that introduce pests and diseases into a new country or pest-free area. And then we can take appropriate action to ensure we are minimising the risk of introduction. So from this chart, we can see we have natural pathways such as air, wind, water, and then vectors such as insects. As we are limited in our control of the elements, we can focus our efforts on the human-assisted routes, which includes plant material, timber, wood chip, soil and growing media, and wood products. So plant health authorities take a risk-based approach to ensure that interventions to protect plants from new pests and diseases are proportionate and targeted to make the best use of resources available. So whilst we are a fairly small team, we are a growing team, but still fairly small, and we have limited government resources at our hands. So we need to target the highest rated risk pests and diseases. So we can see from the risk matrix here that plants for planting are the highest risk. These days, if you have new housing development sites or new business parks, these may contain instant impact trees. These are mature trees grown elsewhere, usually abroad, and then brought to this country. So as an example, an instant impact tree brought a new case of oak processionary moth into the country. The tree was used to decorate the Olympic Park development. So new developments are potential pathways, and if not managed with a biosecurity plan, they can cause considerable damage to the environment. So this tree was the one that brought a new case of OPM into the country. It was planted to commemorate the 2012 Olympics, one of 200, and the management company responsible for the area spotted nests, and upon inspection and age of nest, it was clear that the tree had been imported into the country with OPM. So a finding like that can cost in the region of £100,000 to correct. So in terms of land ownership, we can visualize pathways with the following illustration. Here we go. So we have natural pathways such as birds, wind and water, which we can't control. Then we have lower risk activities such as recreational use, walkers, mountain bikes, and then the risks increase with forestry operations. So that will be bringing equipment onto the site from other locations which may have contaminated soil on it, and restocking and planting where you are directly introducing planting materials. So what can we do? Biosecurity is a set of measures or precautions designed to prevent the introduction or spread of harmful pests, pathogens, or invasive species. And here is the pest and disease cycle. So everyday biosecurity is recognizing that pests and diseases are harbored in natural elements such as soil and water, and then moved via humans and our activity, which can spread infection to new sites, which creates a new outbreak, and the cycle continues. So this picture here shows soil on boots and what the soil is potentially harbouring. So we have infected plant material, live insects, fungus, bacteria, viable seeds of invasive species, nematodes. So the picture shows soil on boots, but this could be a muddy tyre or chainsaw or any other equipment. So what measures can we take individually? Our Keep It Clean campaign sets out simple measures that play a very important role to protect forests from pests and diseases. So clean boots and clothing of soil and plant material, and do this before you leave a site and make a clean start each day. clean and disinfect chainsaws and cutting tools to avoid spreading materials to new sites. And next, knock or brush soil and debris off vehicles and machinery before leaving sites. This includes cabs and footwells, and use off-site cleaning facilities regularly. And where you can, park vehicles on hard standing where possible to avoid coming into contact with soil. And next, develop relationships with nurseries you trust to help source your plants responsibly. Buy plants from nurseries that have a biosecurity plan in place. Monitor new stock for signs of ill health and report suspected trees to the Forestry Commission via the Tree Alert webpage. So for professionals, a personal biosecurity kit should contain the following items: brushes, boot picks, water containers and buckets, and disinfectant for tools and boots. Pressure hoses are good for vehicles and boots if you can afford the space in your car. So really decide what is an appropriate level of measures for you to be taking based on your activities. So as a minimum, we require people to clean their boots and clothing of soil and plant material before leaving a site, and before you start work, making sure you get into the tread, cleaning all the stones and material out of the tread. Please do take the biosecurity e-learning courses, which are available free on the Forestry Commission website. They have a wealth of information for which you will get a pass certificate on completion, and they cover the topics mentioned briefly today in greater detail. As the public's awareness of pests and diseases grows, showing them you are biosecurity aware and have undertaken the learning modules will become more and more important. For every pest and disease, we have prepared these panels. So you can check these for signs and symptoms, what you need to be aware of, and familiarise yourselves with symptoms that you can look out for. There's some really good additional resources online. planthealthy.org.uk has some very good e-learning training modules, which we highly recommend. And the pest and disease panels can be found either at trees.org.uk or the ltoa.org.uk websites. And the Plant Health portal lists every pest and disease we are aware of and gives them a risk rating and description, so you can search through the database, look up any pests and diseases that you need to. It contains over 1,215 pests and diseases, and 25% of these are tree threats. Waterproof signs placed on entry points to parks and forests you are working in are a great way to raise awareness and let the public know what's happening on a site, or even just asking them to clean their boots before leaving lets people know that they can help prevent further spreads and do their bit as well. Or you may wish to put signs on lampposts next to trees you're working on to let them know perhaps what's happening or why they're being felled. So when you find a tree pest or disease or suspicious symptoms, how should we report it? If you do spot any suspicious symptoms or know of a colleague or member of the public that has, then these are to be reported to the Tree Alert webpage. It will require at least 3 photos and some location information. Reports are then triaged by the Forest Research team, and this is our main way of recording and managing reports across the country from both professionals and the public. So please do use this site and promote its use amongst your colleagues. This can be found easily by typing Tree Alert into your browser. And finally, this triangle shows the amount of work in biosecurity for the country. So at the top, we have legislation, policy and strategy. And then in the more middle we have border and inland surveillance. And then as the triangle demonstrates, the majority of work needs to be done by everyone every day, keeping boots and vehicles clean, thinking of trees, being biosecurity aware and reporting any findings. So just to briefly summarise, the threats from pests and diseases is increasing, but pathways can be identified and specific actions taken to mitigate risks. So remember to keep it clean, and please do report any suspicious findings to the Tree Alert webpage. So thank you. I'll just end that now. If anyone has any questions, please do let me know.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rob, for the talk. You're still sharing your screen there. You might want to just stop that. And we do have a question for you from Siri Frost. Siri, if you'd like to unmute and ask Rob. If not, I can ask it for you. So, Rob, the question was: is Keep It Clean the same as the Check, Clean, Dry campaign? Is there a reason for using different biosecurity campaign names across DEFRA?
Yeah, I think it's based very much on the same principles. So it's something we definitely encourage everyone to take on. I don't think there's any specific reason why we've used slightly different terminology. I guess our one was sort of specific to the specifically made by Forestry Commission staff. So it's just slightly different terminology, but the principles should all be the same.
Okay, thank you. Ken Neal, would you like to ask your question? Come off mute and... No. Okay, I may have done something on the settings that have stopped people from unmuting. So apologies, Ken. I will have a look at that before I go any further. But his question was, any advice you can give if you cannot clean your equipment on site?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess the important thing is to clean them after you've left the site, then, if that's possible, before you start work on a new site. So if you can take them home, keep them in the boot of your car, take them home, clean them there. The important thing is not to go onto a new site with contaminated materials or equipment. So if you've used chainsaws and cutting tools and you don't have facilities to clean them on site, make sure you clean them before you take them out the next day, because we don't want the transference of those contaminated soils and materials being moved elsewhere. So if you're able to clean them before you start work the next day, if that's a different location, then at least you've minimised that risk somewhat. So yeah, any opportunity you have to clean the tools before you start work the next day is preferable. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Apologies to Siri and Ken. I think I've fixed the unmuting issue. Yeah, that was my fault. Okay, so time is to. If you do have any more questions, please put them in the chat, and hopefully Rob will still be here at the end where we can have a panel. But we'll move on now to the next speaker, who should be Andrew Hobbit, who is the Oak Processionary Moth Project Manager. I hope you have an easier time saying that than I do. And hopefully you should be able to unmute yourself and take the floor.
Thanks very much, John. I'm just going to try and share my screen, see whether, and if you could just shout to say whether you can see it or
not. Yep, that's great, Andrew.
Okay. It's a good afternoon to everybody now, so thank you for joining. My name is Andrew Hobbit, and I've been working on the OPM project now since 2012, and I've got over 30 years experience working with the Forestry Commission. I'm going to give you a briefing of OPM, where we are now, but also quite a bit of the history of OPM. I'd like to say that all of the work on the project is me, but actually there's quite a large team behind me, and here's just a team. We're notionally based in Noble House in central London. There's Millie Toft and myself there, but there's also Jill Brown and Teresa work out of our Buckswan Oak office. And I rely very closely on Southampton University to provide database services for us and also mapping. And furthermore, we also work very closely with our forest research colleagues over in the Alice Holt Research Facility. So I'm going to start with looking at the future and what are we planning to do with OPM in the coming year. And these are really the 5 main themes that have been ongoing since 2012 on the programme. So we know that OPM is established in England and is spreading. It's a question of how do we limit that rate of spread and reduce the impacts of OPM on tree health and also human and animal health. So any new outbreaks we find, especially in areas what we now call the pest-free area, and I'm going to talk about that quite a bit of detail later on. We deal with those in a very robust manner, and we also have a range of activities that we do. Really, again, there's 3 aspects to that. There's trying to find the thing, that's looking, surveying, mostly visually, but we also do use pheromone traps for that. We have a control program, and that's with a framework contract with some suppliers for that, and actually a large communications package. And obviously, awareness days like this is part of that remit. We're also providing. Can people just check to make sure that they're muted, please? Thank you. We're also providing a test and development function building on our knowledge. So I work very closely with DEFRA policy colleagues on that, and there's more will be happening on that hopefully from September of this coming year, where we've been trialling plans for OPM with people such as the National Trust, local authorities, Woodland Trust, and of course we're always looking to build partnerships with landowners. So where did OPM come from? Well, it was discovered in the Kew Gardens, just to the north of Kew Gardens in 2006. And this was actually on a housing development on some instant planted trees. So, Rob, in the previous presentation, highlighted the biosecurity issues there are with these instant trees. And we still have a big problem with instant trees. Hopefully we've closed off that loophole with oak trees coming into this country. But anyway, there was a housing development to the north of Kew Gardens where a number of sort of fastidiate oak trees were planted, and they were planted in 2005, and the caterpillars appeared in 2006. And we found out about it because people were suffering from a rash, and the people in the housing development approached their local environmental team, and they didn't know what these caterpillars were. So the Natural History Museum were brought in, and eventually the diagnosis came back that this was oak processionary moth, something which was not native to GB, and it was the first known breeding population in GB. So there's a problem in that we've got this new invasive pest in 2006, and there was a bit of kicking of tires as to whose responsibility is it to deal with this. Is it a public health issue because we know that OPM has these urticating hairs which can cause a rash to people? So is that what would now be called Public Health England? Is it actually an local environmental problem? So again, that could just be dealt with under local authority legislation, or is it actually a tree health problem? Because we also know that OPM is a species which does cause defoliation of oak trees. So there was a humming and hawing, and eventually it was decided that plant health legislation was the relevant form to tackle OPM, and so it became the Forestry Commission's responsibility, because the oak tree is deemed to be a forest tree, and so the Forestry Commission started the process of issuing statutory notices for the management of OPM. So from 2006 until I started in 2012, we were issuing statutory notices with no financial support to recipients of this. And then in 2012, I made a business case to the Chief Executive, the Forestry Commission Executive Board, and put forward proposals for funding, which was approved. But I did make it very clear that OPM is established, and there was a paper written in 2010 by Dr. Nigel Straw saying that. And as you can see from this map, the yellow area right in the middle is the initial outbreak from 2006 to now the outer line, which is that blue, which is now where we are at present. So OPM over the last, where are we looking at? So that's 15 years now of data we've got. We can see what the spread of OPM has been. And what's interesting is this is a slide that Nigel Straw did on the modelling, potential modelling for OPM in 2011, and what he thought would be happening over the coming years. And when you compare the map that Nigel drew up to actually where we are now, he's not far wrong. It's actually gone to roughly where we've got the 2025 line on that map. So we knew that OPM was here to stay, and we knew it was going to spread. And what's also interesting is the rate of spread Nigel seems to have got about right. So there's a colonisation phase where it took off at about 3 kilometres a year, and then it's tended to increase to nearly, well, getting on for nearly 7.5 to 8 kilometres a year. And that's borne out with working closely with the modelling department at Cambridge University, and they've been analysing the data that we've been gathering. So OPM is here to stay, and actually it's spreading more quickly. One of the things that we should appreciate about OPM is actually how its life cycle works. It's a 1-year life cycle, and if we look at this graphic, and we'll start in August, late August, going into September. Can people just check that they're muted, please? Thank you. So late August, eggs are laying on the twigs of oak trees, maybe the size of your little finger, and they are just up in the canopy of the oak tree for about 8 months of the year, until late March, early April, when the caterpillars emerge and they go through 6 stages of development, what we call instars, and that's, we're trying to represent that with the 6 small graded squares there. The caterpillars emerge, they're very small, maybe 2 millimeters in length, and then by the time that they're ready to pupate, they've got to about, I don't know, 2.5, 3 centimeters in length. Pupate for some time, turn into a moth. The moth has no feeding parts, and then the whole process starts again. So I work with quite a large budget each year, and this year it's been signed off that there's a £1.7 million cash budget. Most of that work, £750 million, is spent on control, but also actually the knowledge that we need is quite an expensive process. That's just over £100,000. Looking for it is £640,000. Plus there's a lot of evidence and research work that we're doing and the communication. I'm now going to take you through some photos of what to look for when surveying for OPM. One of the things you will not easily be able to find is egg plaques, and so I'd never recommend looking for these, because they're invariably on the outer branches of the tree high up, and also, as you can see in that photo, they tend to be a nice colour, the same colour as the twigs of the oak tree. So in that picture there, you're looking at about, I don't know, 150 to 200 eggs, of which 90% of those will hatch. And the hatching is actually quite interesting. So the picture you're looking at here on the left-hand side, you can see that the caterpillars have emerged. They've actually emerged before there's any oak leaves to feed on. And they have this facility to go into a torpor, waiting for the leaves to emerge and then start to eat the oak leaves. And what's also interesting about opium is how it's very much dependent on what the temperature is like. So in 2014 it emerged on the 21st of March, and this is a big thanks to the Royal Parks, especially Richmond Park, for finding a Plex thermometer. And you may remember a couple of years ago, the Beast from the East 2018, actually it's almost a month later that opium emerged on the 16th of April. So this is actually quite an important thing to appreciate, because when we're doing the control program, we're actually relying on the emergence to make a decision as to when we're going to start to do the spraying program. So the caterpillars have now emerged, and then they go through these stages of development. And what you're looking at here is the caterpillars have gone through maybe about stage 3, and they're starting to get this rather gregarious nature. They're coalescing, and at this stage they don't have these toxic hairs, these CT. But as they go through, they start to get these toxic hairs. So they start to move further along the tree, down the trunk, for example. I very sensibly took this photo and got Millie to hold the pound coin for scale. And what you're seeing here is the caterpillars quite low down, starting to think about doing this nest formation. You can see in the bottom of the picture there's some caterpillar frass as well. And then the caterpillars get bigger. You can see lots of long wispy hairs here. Those aren't the things to worry about. It's actually the minute hairs which cause the rash. And in a few slides' time, I can show you that to scale. So here you're seeing some couple of photos of why it gets its name, oak processionary moth. The one on the left-hand side was taken in North London. That's at Alexandra Palace, and that's not actually a typical procession. That's just a singular file. And also, what you can see is these silken web, these silken strands, and that's them travelling up and down the trunk of the tree to the periphery, where they'd be feeding mostly at night time on the leaves. The one on the right-hand side is more typical. Maybe 2, 3, 4 caterpillars in width, and the theory is that this is to make it look like a bigger creature, and so they're less likely to be attacked by predators. So when we're surveying for opium, it's actually pretty difficult to just see caterpillars. You're looking for evidence of nests, for example, and also these silken trails. So the picture which I've highlighted on the left-hand side is about as simple as you're ever going to find opium. So that's very clear, it's nice and bright and white. But the picture on the right-hand side is starting to show you how the nest discolors over time, and actually it then becomes very difficult to see. After only maybe a couple of weeks, it starts to go the same color as the actual bark of the oak tree. And now this next photo, we're going to start to see another procession on the right hand side, and you're starting to see a method of control where an industrial vacuum cleaner, the same type of cleaner that's used for asbestos removal, actually literally just hoovering up the caterpillars. And on the right hand side you're seeing a very large nest, maybe the size of a rugby ball. It must be stressed that that's an extreme case, and also within that photo you can start to see on the far right hand side some foliar feeding, so starting to attack the actual oak tree itself. In terms of nest size, it could be anything from the size of a 50 pp, up to a rugby ball, sometimes even bigger than a rugby ball. Now this is a photo of a nest where the caterpillars have gone into their cocoons, and you're seeing shed skins. So those aren't actually caterpillars; those are actually the shed skins as they've gone into the nest. And that nest could be actually very low down on the tree. There was a couple of years ago, there seemed to be a prevalence for them being at the very base of the tree on the intergrade with maybe where the root collar was of the tree. And if you think about that, it's actually quite troublesome for inquisitive dogs, or if you've got cattle or horses as well, for example. And so now this this slide here is just showing you what OPM actually looks like. It's a little brown job. It's something which is nocturnal. Unless you're a specialist, it'd be very difficult to actually identify this. It lives only for 1 or 2 days, strongly attracted to light, but very rare that you'd actually see the actual moths themselves. The male, which is the one in the bottom there, is actually a stronger flyer than the female, and that has been shown to appear on the south coast as a migrant from France, for example. Females have never been caught as a breeding population on the south coast, so it's interesting that it's needed this human pathway to get into this country. One of the pieces of work that's been going on, and this is being led by Newcastle University, some of the parasitism that maybe could happen with opium. There's actually a specific fly called Carcelia illica, which seems to have a good response to keeping opium numbers down. So there's been some research happening in the Royal Parks again at Richmond Park. But we've also observed this parasitic fly in Hampstead Heath, and I've just been speaking to a contractor just yesterday who works in the Medway area of Kent, and again he's observed this parasitic fly on some nests in Kent. So there does seem to be some some natural control of opium. I've also observed things like great tits and woodpeckers predating on caterpillars, but not to a great extent. You'd have thought we'd have learnt our lesson in 2006 about instant trees coming into Britain with OPM, but actually we've constantly had a number of these instant trees bringing OPM on an ad hoc basis, but 2019 was a particularly challenging year. I had a phone call in early June about OPM being observed at the Solent on the south coast on some instant trees that had been planted. This was a local authority planting. Went and investigated, and lo and behold, yes, there was OPM there. And this actually started a chain of events where we started to do further investigation of imports into this country. So that meant that we had to look at over 2,000 separate sites, mostly to do with housing. And that was a very challenging summer, looking, with my team at over 2,000 sites, not just across England, but also in working with the devolved administrations of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And of those over 2,000 sites, we actually found 98 positive findings. And to put that into a context for you in the southwest, you can see that there's one down there. I think that was in the in the Devon area, if I remember rightly. So those 98 positive findings was very frustrating, and we did, significant control measures. But there's one or two sites where we got in late, i.e. the caterpillars had pupated, and one of them was Elmsmere Port up in the Liverpool area. And you can see the trees, these were the instant trees that were planted, and the inset photo on the left-hand side is actually evidence of a dead moth which had been flying, which was frustrating. And we can also see in the right-hand side of the photo there the spent nest. So that alerted us that we would need to do some further investigation in 2020. and rather frustratingly, we found that the opium had spread into the wider environment in Ellesmere Port. Hard to see on the left-hand side, but maybe you can just make out the nest reasonably high up in the tree. This is a semi-mature tree, probably about 10 to 15 meters in height. So looking at the map here, you can see where we had concerns, and where the number 6 is where the Ellesmere Port is. But you can also see there's the number 2, that's Oxfordshire, that's a place called Ducklington near Witney. Again, that was to do with the interception. But then we've got some more natural spread. Number 3 is Luton, number 1 is going out into Kent, and number 4 is starting to go into the Sussex area. So what have we been doing in the southwest region? So the red dots you're looking at are where we had interceptions from 2019, but where we did eradication measures, and we can find no more evidence of OPM. But I will be surveying again these areas in 2021. Also, the blue dots are what we call permanent plots for looking for opium, the pest-free areas. So that's an annual basis. We look at 24 trees, and that's just to essentially a belt and braces to make sure whether we're finding opium in those areas. So you can see we've got a reasonable spread across the southwest there. What is interesting is, and again Rob mentioned about reporting of pests and diseases, and in Tree Alert, which is managed by our forest research colleagues, we can see an exponential growth in the number of reports of OPM from just 62 in 2017 to over 750 in 2020. So, you know, a massive uptick in reports, and my suspicion is that's just going to keep on increasing. I said about the urticating hairs, and they're very small barbs. There's maybe about 60,000 on each caterpillars. They seem to use these as a defense mechanism, and it can cause some nasty rashes. So it's a guess the body part picture here really, but the picture on the left hand side is a lady who was covered head to toe in opium rash. And what's interesting about this case is the lady lives in South London, Crystal Palace, and she has got no oak trees in her garden. Anyway, she went to her GP with the rash, and the GP wasn't sure what it was, but it's a large practice, so got a second opinion. And we do have some OPM leaflets which we've been handing out to GP surgeries, for example, but also pharmacies. And the GP actually started to put 2 and 2 together, and they came to the conclusion that this was rash from OPM. And what was interesting was that the prognosis was that actually the urticating hairs had got blown from oak trees nearby. Her garden backs onto a park in the Crystal Palace area, and the hairs from the caterpillars had got blown onto her bed linen, and then she'd got covered in the rash. What's more typical though is actually the 3 pictures on the right hand side, and these are all people who work in the ARB sector. So the person in the middle with rash all over their neck was doing OPM control using doing manual nest removal, so working, you know, on a cherry picker. And the trouble is, no matter how well you try to protect yourself, if you get a scratch, you could just introduce even more hairs. The picture on the far right hand side is an OPM surveyor, just brushed up against a nest accidentally, arm covered in rash. And the picture on the bottom is the person who works at Kew Gardens, in the Arboretum section there in Kew Gardens, and has become sensitised, and again this lady suffers badly from rash, unfortunately. We don't have an awful lot of human health reports of opium, but like the graph I showed you for reports of people reporting opium, health reports have increased as well. So I always say, well, why would people come to the Forestry Commission with a public health matter? So I know that there's significant underreporting, but as you can see, there's been an uptick in the number of reports of opium. And then getting towards the end of my presentation, we're looking at, you know, some of the foliar feeding that happens, and it creates this rather skeleton-like look for the oak leaves. Tends to be quite localized. So the next two pictures, it maybe isn't too obvious, but what we're looking at here is a couple of veteran trees in Richmond Park. The one on the right hand side, at the very top there, is very light foliage, and that's the start of defoliation. And the picture on the right hand side is the top, I don't know, maybe 25%, where you can see a significant amount of foliar feeding. Now, the trees in Richmond Park are already maybe under a lot of other stresses. So there's ground compaction because there's a lot of people. There's problems with water. So this is another thing that is affecting the health of the oak tree. So there's a concern, especially with the veteran trees in Richmond Park. Work with a number of people, and here's just a name check for some who are helping with the OPM program. I don't know, John, whether you that's the last slide, John. I don't know whether you wanted to take questions now, or do you want me to wait till the end of the day, John?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, Andrew. I have to say, I was so engaged in that I actually lost track of the chat for a little while there. But there have been a couple of questions.
Yes.
One from Carol about the introduction of a predatory species and the effect on native. Carol, would you like to pose your question to Andrew?
Yes, I can do. Yes, I'm just curious to know whether I understand that these flies, parasitic flies, are species specific, but has there been any research into whether it is possible that they could cross over and start predating on any of our native caterpillars or moths or butterfly caterpillars?
Hi, Carol. There hasn't been any research in this country. I do know that this parasitic fly, Carcelia illica, is specific to OPM. What's interesting is we don't know how it got into this country, and we've never really got to the bottom of that. But as far as I know, that actual specific parasitic fly doesn't affect, shall we say, native moths, well, native caterpillars. There are some general parasitoids which do affect OPM, but they are native to this country as well.
Great, thank you, Andrew. There was another question, but Rob seems to have answered it in the chat. So yeah, I think that's all for now. But we'll move on because we've got two more speakers to fit in. So if I could invite Mick to join the speakers now. Mick is the Tree Health Officer for the South West. That's great. I can see your screen there, Mick. So just put it on slide view, I think.
Yeah, struggling to. Thought I was sharing the screen now.
You're sharing the screen. It's
I see. Yeah, got you. So is that any better?
Yeah, perfect. Over to you.
All right, thank you. I might just shift the screens around so I'm not actually looking at the camera. I can't do it. Okay, I'll have to forgive me if I keep glancing down. Can you see me okay? Because my picture looks quite broken.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. Okay. Right. So, hi everyone. I'm Mick Fiddle. I've worked as a tree health officer for the Forestry Commission for about 11 years now. Primarily involved in surveillance and detection for various nasties. And today's sort of theme of today is the human impact and the human sort of effects of these pests and diseases. So I've got a short presentation on pine processionary moth and my personal rather unpleasant brush with it in the summer of 2019. So just a bit of background on pine processionary moth. So it's the same genus as oak processionary moth that Andrew has given you great detail on. As the name suggests, it's a pest of pine rather than oak, and the main hosts in sort of order of preference are Pinus nigra, Scots pine, Monterey pine, and maritime pine, and occasionally it's observed on Atlantic cedar, particularly in North Africa, and occasionally again on European larch, but generally I think in areas where there's high populations in the pine species. It's native to the Mediterranean basin, but it is expanding, and it's present throughout most areas of France. It's up in some places along the north coast of France, so Normandy sort of area is about as far north as it's got, and it is on the move, potentially assisted by the climatic change as well, but also movements of plant material, tying in with what Rob and Andrew were saying previously. It's also similar to oak processionary moth in that it has these similar urticating hairs, but the difference with OPM is the timing of the life cycle. So it tends to pupate in the summer rather than the spring, like oak processionary moth, and then it feeds during the winter. So during the autumn and winter, it will be feeding on pine foliage and defoliating them, and it builds these nests, similar nests, but in the pine trees at the tips of the pine branches, and these are visible from now, so January and early spring. And then in the spring, then the caterpillars mature, and then they process in a line out of the trees, and then they bury themselves in the soil, and that's where they pupate from in the summer. So it's almost the reverse. It tends to be visible during the winter time, which is quite critical to what I'm about to say. So this may have a sort of wish you were here sort of vibe, because it's a lot of my holiday snaps, but if you can cast your mind back to when going on holiday was something that we all did occasionally. In the summer of 2019, ironically, I've been working very hard on these oak processionary moth interceptions that Andrew was talking about previously. So I was really looking forward to my holiday in the south of France, which had been planned for a little while. And that was the destination, so the southwest coast of France. And you could argue that in my line of work, I should have foreseen what was about to happen, but I didn't, to be honest. It wasn't something I considered at all, pine processionary moth being a problem. From a human health point of view, didn't factor in my holiday plans at all. But the destination was the land forest in southwest France. It's a fascinating place, massive, 1 million hectares of forest, 90% of it is maritime pine, and it's actually changed the land type. So originally a lot of the area was swamp, and the planting of these pine trees, which started in the 18th century, has actually changed the land type into a sort of sandy forest rather than a swampy area. And as you can imagine, there is a significant sort of cultural association with all these pine trees. There's a cultural sort of use of the resin in turpentine and preservative production and rosin, and also there are industrial. There's a DRT company, that's originally situated in this area, and subsequently it's grown and has plants in India and China as well. But this industrialized the process of getting the resin from the pine trees and making preservatives out of them. So very interesting from a professional point of view. But the idea I'm trying to get across is that there are a lot of pine trees there. So this is where I was headed in early August 2019. And we had a fairly uneventful journey down. Arrived at the campsite. This is the campsite, as you can see. It's right in the pine forest. There's my trusty Volvo V70, which is sadly no longer with us, but we made it without incident. It was a relatively nice campsite. The weather was perfect. The pitches were a little bit small, I must admit, and they were a bit slopey, but that wasn't my largest complaint. Because after a couple of days, I started to, particularly me, started to develop very itchy feet. These photos are when it had calmed down a little bit, because I didn't immediately think to take photographs of it at the time. But yeah, I had lots of little red blisters, little red bumps on my feet and ankles. And I'd assumed it was some sort of insect bites. I thought it might be ant bites or sand fleas or something as we go to the beach and what have you. But it didn't give it a huge amount of thought, but it was really, really itchy, quite uncomfortable. But didn't think too much of it. Until a couple of days later, when I started to develop the same rash on basically the insides of my arms, and any exposed sort of area that was more sensitive skin, I guess you would describe it. Not on my beautiful face, but generally sort of backs of the knees and insides of the arms, that sort of area. And at this stage, I was convinced it was a sort of allergy to this new sun cream that I put on, because I've been slathering these whiter, paler areas of my skin with this new sun cream, and that seemed to be where I was getting this reaction. So at this stage, I went to the pharmacy in the town. I mean, pine processionary moth still hadn't really crossed my mind at this stage. I went to the pharmacy in the town and showed them in there and said I thought it was probably an allergy to the sun cream. They gave me some antihistamines, which didn't make any difference whatsoever. And then a couple of days after that, if you can control yourself, the rash started appearing on other areas of my body, including my torso, but it wasn't specific to there. Won't go into any more detail, but it was cropping up everywhere. I couldn't understand that because obviously the sun cream wasn't going all over my body. It was only going in certain areas. And I was thinking at this stage, is it a reaction to the chlorine in the pool? Is it the sea was very rough there? And this still hadn't really crossed my mind that it would be pine processionary moth. But I was getting quite grumpy and quite uncomfortable, and my family were commenting on it. But shortly after that, they started to get the same sort of symptoms as well. So that's my youngest son on the left there. He's not the type to sit still and pose for photographs, so that was the best I could manage. But he had it in similar places on the inside of his forearms, but also you can't really see it in that picture, but in between his fingers you could see that there was rash in between his fingers. And also my wife started getting reaction as well. My eldest son, interestingly, didn't suffer any rash at all. So at this stage, that is when I said, I wonder if it is pine processionary moth, because we're in a pine forest. But I had not seen any evidence of pine processionary moth. I've seen it before in Spain, and I couldn't see any evidence that there was any reason to suspect there was presence of the caterpillar there. Anyway, I suggested this to my wife, that it might be pine processionary moth, and she said, I think I'm right in quoting, saying, for God's sake, Nick, not everything is about your work. So at that stage, we decided that it was better to go to the doctor. My son as well, my youngest son also, I'm not sure if this was connected, but I believe that there are cases. My son developed a high fever and a sort of upset stomach as well, nausea. And I'm not sure if that was connected as well, but we needed to go to the doctor anyway. So we were waiting in the doctor's surgery, eventually went in, and the first thing the doctor said when he saw us is, c'est le chenille, which is, that's the caterpillar. So he recognised it immediately. I had a brief smoke look at my wife, because I was right, but it was good to get a diagnosis. I still couldn't quite understand why we hadn't seen any signs of this pine processionary moth. Just a reminder of what I was looking for at the time. These are the nests, which I said, as I said at the start, appear in the winter time. So start to appear in January, and transpires by the summer. So they degrade during the spring and then early summer. By the middle of the summer, they've completely disappeared. So there's no sign of those. And the other thing that you need to look for when looking for this pest is defoliation. But again, as I said at the start, the caterpillars emerge in summer. The moths emerge in the summer from the soil, and then they lay their eggs, and they don't start actually feeding on the pine until the autumn. So you wouldn't see this during the summer. So that was the reason there were no signs, really. And there may have been, if you're looking hypercritically at those photographs, you might see a bit of defoliation in some of the pine, possibly. But generally, they looked healthy, and I couldn't see any signs of it whatsoever. And the questions still remain: why were we still getting this reaction when there weren't any sort of active nests around? And that photo on the right there, I think, sums it up. We had our washing out on the line, and I think that there were nests degrading that were sort of invisible, and just a general presence of the floating urticating hairs floating around, getting in our washing, and that's how we ended up with it, in our sheets and towels and all over us. Also, I think that there was probably degrading nests on the pitch itself, because my youngest son spent most of the time with his cars grubbing around in the dirt, and he had it worse in between his fingers, as I said. So I think that's what we were experiencing, and so yes, it was unpleasant and interesting in equal measure. I found it more interesting than the rest of my family. But they didn't mess around in terms of the medicines that were prescribed to us. I mentioned that antihistamines didn't touch it at all. My wife takes antihistamines anyway for hay fever, but they didn't make any difference whatsoever. And we were prescribed this antibacterial soap on the left, so the topical corticosteroid cream, and I think the thing that really seemed to make the difference was the systemic steroid tablets, and I had to take 5 of those at a time in the morning. So they were quite, it was quite a lot of medicine that we were pumping over ourselves and taking. My son was prescribed something slightly different. He wasn't given steroids because his wasn't quite as severe as the rest of us. And of course, the anaesthetic. And I'm only sort of half joking when I say that, because I found that it was very, very uncomfortable, difficult to sleep, and I found that probably half a bottle of red wine was about the sort of ideal amount to be able to get to sleep in the evening, because at night it was much more uncomfortable than in the day. That and sitting in the pool. So drinking and sitting in the pool, that's what you come on holiday to do anyway, isn't it? So no great shakes. However, once we had that diagnosis, we were due to be staying on this campsite for another couple of weeks, or another 10 days or so. And so at that point, we sat down and said, well, we can't stay here because it's actually having a material effect on our health. So we changed our holiday plans and up sticks and packed up and went off to Bergerac area, away from the pine trees, which is also very nice and beautiful. And they have chestnut blight there, so I was happy to from my tree health point of view, to be looking at the chestnut rather than the pine. And so that brings it to a bit of a close. I mean, this is my sort of thoughts and reflections on the experience. Basically, it was very uncomfortable. I would describe it as itchy as hell. It was really, really more itchy than than like being covered in mosquito bites. I think it was really itchy. They were like little tiny sort of chicken pox type blisters. That's how I would describe them. They're little blister, but only a few millimeters across generally. It was really persistent, and I still had a rash 2 or 3 weeks after we got home, and I think that was partly because it was in our clothes, and it was also on our tent and camping equipment, and I was rolling up the tent and stuff. And every time I sort of packed up our camping kit, I would flare up again with the rash. So I think I kept getting exposed to more and more of the hairs even after we'd left. It did affect individuals differently. There was only one other person that I was aware of on the campsite that had the similar symptoms to us, and it wasn't as serious, and they said they were coming back next year. And like I said, my eldest son didn't have a mark on him. So I guess there's degrees of susceptibility within individuals. I don't know whether we were just unlucky in where our pitch was, or whether we just happened to walk through an area of high infestation or something, or whether we're just highly susceptible people. I don't know. From a sort of practical point of view, I hadn't appreciated that the nests would be entirely invisible by mid-August, and also that the defoliation symptoms that I would be looking out for are not visible during the summer. So from a surveillance point of view, that's helpful to have first-hand experience of that, because that's the sort of opposite of what I would have expected. And then sort of more philosophically, and I don't want to labour this too much because it was unpleasant, but there are worse things going on in the world. But the impacts, I really appreciated the sort of impact that these tree pests and diseases can have on a personal basis. I really felt glad that we were leaving the pine area, and I felt sorry for people who had to live and work there. And speaking as someone who's worked with trees my whole sort of professional life, I love trees, but I was really, really glad to see the pine in my rearview mirror when we left. It was, and also if you asked me whether I was going to go back on holiday there again, I'd say no way. So the impact on the tourism, I think that is a material thing, and I think if this did get established in areas, the pine areas in Britain, it may be a material consideration. And then there's parallels with the oak processionary moth situation as well. And psychologically, I mean, maybe that's slightly lofty to call it psychological, but I like I say, my view of the pine trees, I was thankful when I went home that I didn't live in an area that's full of pine or oak trees for that matter. That there aren't, so that this would not become a problem for me in my normal day-to-day life at home. I'm continue to be able to dry my washing outside and things like that. But also my wife, who's not necessarily a tree person, she started to describe the rash and our experience on holiday to people when she came home. She said, "Oh, we were allergic to the pine trees," because it was a shorthand, easier way to explain what we were allergic to. And I always tried to correct her, say, no, we were allergic to the caterpillars that were in the pine trees. But generally speaking, to all intents and purposes, we were. I couldn't see any evidence of the caterpillars there, but we were still allergic to the area. So it did make me wonder whether people in London are going to start resenting living near oak trees and start to say, "Oh, I'm actually allergic to the oak trees themselves," rather than the caterpillar. So that maybe getting a bit too heavy there, but that's the sort of reflections that I had having been through the experience. And that probably sums it up for me. Andrew sent on this photograph yesterday that was sent on by Julia Branson, who helps us with our data management, her sister was on holiday in Portugal and noticed these pine processionary moths all over the wheelie bin there. So again, in January, not necessarily what you would expect to see crawling around, but that's just a final picture. Hope it was interesting.
Great, thank you very much, Mick. Yeah, you've reminded me. I should have warned people that there was nudity in advance of your slideshow. There, you did say. Okay, so just been having a little offline chat with Rachel, who's going to be our final speaker now. Rachel was going to sort of talk for 20 minutes with time for questions and answers, but that would put us massively over time there. So what Rachel's very kindly agreed to speak to us at one of the later events, if anyone's booked in for those, which is really kind of her. So that allows us 10 minutes now just to look at the questions that are in the chat. So there are one or two. Let me just scroll back. So Siri Frost had a question about oak processionary moth, but I guess the same would also come to the same question about pine processionary moth. So Siri, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yeah, so thank you. There's been some really interesting talks. The one I was asking was just about what the extent of oak tree loss has been associated with OPM, just understanding the impact on the landscape and really what we might expect to see.
Hi Siri, thanks for your question. We've had one or two cases where people have been removing oak trees in the urban environment because there's a cost involved with having OPM. I can think of a case in South London where the children aren't playing in their back garden. Obviously, it's a big back garden with an oak tree in it, but their friends won't come around. So there is that consideration. And also, I sometimes get the question, well, should we plant oak trees? So, we certainly do encourage you to keep on planting oak trees, but as Mick alluded to in his presentation, people do start to think, differently about tree species and not necessarily just blaming the caterpillar, just actually going to the root cause. Do I bother with oak trees? So the short answer is yes, there has been some evidence of it, but not an awful lot.
Great, thank you, Andrew. There was another previous question from sorry, Mick, it was going to question about same question but to pine. What effects does it have on the actual pine trees?
It's a similar defoliation. I think it's viewed as a serious pest of pine in Europe in terms of the defoliation. I'm not sure in terms of facts and figures and areas and things, but it's something that that they have to manage both from a sort of pest point of view, but more pressingly, I think the human health factors as well. So in some areas of Italy, I think they do overhead spraying and things of pine plantations near areas. Great,
thank you. So there's a question I was going to ask then from Liam Plummer about the planning issues and whether developers can be controlled. Liam, would you like to put your question to the team?
Yeah, thank you. It was really just about if a lot of these diseases are being spread through the kind of instant tree planting, is there scope to embed nationally in kind of legislation policy the need for trees to be sourced appropriately and giving tree officers that kind of power to ensure that happens, really? Thank you.
Shall I answer this one, Mick? Hi Liam, thanks for your question. Well, the trees are meant to be sourced responsibly, so they come in with something like a plant passport, so it's free of pests and diseases, and people in good faith do bring trees in without pests and diseases. The trouble is sometimes you just can't find the pest or disease, and so if you think back to the very beginning of this session, Rob made it very clear that soil is a problem. So actually, just bringing in container grown plants, you just don't know what's in the soil. So it's a constant battle. I think we're always just going to have to keep on, educating people about, maybe trying to go for homegrown stuff, and also try to use reputable suppliers. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of the imports were from reputable suppliers, especially on the oak side of things in 2019. We've closed a loophole in that instant oak trees aren't allowed to come into this country now, but of course there's other stuff on the horizon that no doubt will come into this country.
Great, thank you. Next question was from Guy Kent, but I've just lost the question now. Sorry. Oh, I think it's been answered by Mick in the chat. So, pine procession moth not currently in the UK. Yeah, so you've got that one answered. Okay, so I think. Oh, one question you just popped up, Brian Fraser, about plant material entering the UK. Brian, would you like to pose that question?
Sorry, it wasn't a question, it was a statement to say that all plants coming into the country now have to come with a fetal sanitary certificate, which means they're inspected within 14 days of coming in by a plant health officer in the state on which it comes from. So hopefully, because they are being looked at literally before they are sent, there's more chance of them being seen rather than an in-season inspection, which could take place, months before the trees are actually shipped.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Actually, it was Rachel, our final speaker, who we won't now hear from today, was actually, I believe, going to cover that. Rachel, if you are still on the line and would like to just give a couple of minutes, just sort of response to Brian there, and just something that would save you joining us for no contribution at all.
Hi, yeah, John, no worries at all. And yeah, Brian, that's absolutely right. I think perhaps just to go over a few of the things that have changed since we've now the transition period has ended and we've now kind of officially gone into our new world. So one of the major changes that we've had is plants and plant products used to be able to come in from the European Union to Great Britain, accompanied by a plant passport, an EU plant passport, because of the changes that have happened with the end of the transition period. They now have to, as Brian has said, be accompanied by a phytosanitary certificate instead. So that does strengthen those controls more than they were. We are in a kind of period of a phased introduction of some of these rules. So they come into force, or they came into force in January for the kind of highest priority plants and plant products. So in particular, that's around hosts of Xylella. We haven't really heard about Xylella today, but John, I'm sure in future events we will talk about Xylella. But so things like lavender and they're all being coming in with phytosanitary certificates at the moment. That's kind of slightly different. And then come April and July, there are further phasings where more and more products get incorporated into those checks. One of the other changes is around, you might have heard of protected zones and protected zone pests. So in Great Britain, we have 2 protected zones. Or we did have one for oak processionary moth, which was for everywhere outside of those core and control areas that Andrew took us through, those areas in the southeast of England. Everywhere else in Great Britain was a protected zone for oak processionary moth. The other protected zone was in the west of Scotland. So this is kind of the other way around. So the west of Scotland is the protected zone and the rest of the UK isn't, for 3 species of bark beetle. In leaving the EU, we can't use the protected zone term anymore. It's an EU definition. We've reverted to what's called pest-free areas. So that's a kind of internationally recognised definition. So there'll be a kind of, you'll hear pest-free areas now rather than protected zones. The other thing that Rob mentioned, the kind of major change, is around wood packaging material. So all wood packaging material moving from Great Britain to third countries, so that includes the EU now, or entering Great Britain, now has to be compliant with ISPM 15, the ISPM 15 standard. So that's a key change and affects much more than just our sector. It's quite a fundamental change for trade into and out of the country. And then finally, because we're now regulating more materials, so we're regulating imports from EU member states as well as the rest of the world, obviously the volume of that regulated material is really now going to really ramp up. So we're going to have a lot more work to do. And we're just, again, rather than having this kind of hard deadline, we're kind of phasing inspections in. New border control posts have been or are being constructed. In the meantime, we're to avoid kind of congestion at ports that are already operational, we're carrying out inspections at what are called places of destination. So if you're importing, you can import your loads direct to a place of destination. It has to be approved, and then your load can wait there rather than being held up at a port. And as I said, we're phasing those checks in. So so we are doing our best in times of uncertainty to kind of ease pressures on importers of regulated material as far as we possibly can. So I think they're probably just a few highlights of things that have changed.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Rachel, for squeezing all that information in. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the 90 minutes. Just to sum up, I mean, I myself have learned loads today. I thought I knew most of that, but apparently it's not, and it's always really, really good to have a reminder, particularly with the very sobering thoughts of what we have to look out for and the consequences of the human impacts of the plants. Just like to thank Tracy for her help behind the scenes and screens. Thank you very much to our speakers. All been absolutely fantastic. And again, apologies to Rachel for overrunning. The recordings will be made available. We'll circulate that through the e-alerts. So keep a lookout for that, and then feel free to pass on the link. And we've got 3 more in the season coming up. And we'll be talking about ash dieback next week. So I hope to see you all same time, same place next week. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.